Salutations, my friends. Have you ever seen a programme and wished it become a series? In this episode we gaze at such a treat from 1977. The days of flared trousers and kipper ties. The proposed series was called Spectre and was filmed in the UK, featuring the talents of actor Mr. Robert Culp, he of I Spy and Bonanza, to name but a measly few of a cavalcade of visual entertainment. It featured witchcraft, demonology, and revelled in the arcane, and could have become a terrific little series, but alas, it is only the only instalment and nugget we have of what could have been. In late 1976 into early 1977, Mr. Gene Roddenberry wanted to diversify and attempted numerous shows to sell after the tremendous success of his Star Trek. Roddenberry in the mid-1970s created other shows such as The Questor Tapes and Genesis 2, but failed to get them syndicated into a series. Turning his back on science fiction, Roddenberry decided to look and focus on an alternative genre. Seemingly, as with the BBC in the late 1980s in the UK, it wasn't the producers' dissatisfaction with the genre, but with the American network's attitude towards it. Science fiction was insulated, so it did not clash with mainstream series and was really relegated to a rivalry with itself as a genre. Examples here, as I've mentioned, were the pilot shows such as Genesis 2, which was scuppered at the last stage of production as it was found to be too similar to Planet of the Apes in concept, as it's about an astronaut waking up in the dystopian future. So it was kind of reminiscent of that plot. There was also, as I said, the Questor Tapes, which was vetoed as it was felt it was too similar to the successful $6 Million Man show, simply because it contained a cyborg. Alas, such were the hurdles Roddenberry faced. A bit pissed off, Gene Roddenberry turned to the horror genre. Roddenberry felt he wanted to contribute to the horror genre exactly in the self-same discernment as he had shown to the science fiction genre. Roddenberry collaborated with Samuel A. Peoples, who was credited to Star Trek's second pilot episode Where No Man Has Gone Before, and securing a co-writer. Both of them created Spectre in the hope for a potential new series, swapping little green men from the stars for fanged, harried deities from the pits of Hades, or in the case of Spectre, we have a few beasts from the bowels of damnation, including what looks like a papier-mâché frog creature at the end, gnashing and thrashing about in the plumed veils of black mass torched fogginess. The plot here sees a Scotch-worshipping Dr. Hamilton, played by Gig Young. Now, Gig Young was a famous Hollywood actor known for a gamut of films, including such notable appearances in productions such as They Shoot Horses, Don't They? In 1969, and his contribution spanned 4 decades in film and television appearances, from the 1940s right up until his suicide in 1978, with this being his last performance. Dr. Hamilton pops in to see an old work colleague, come friend arch-criminologist William Sebastian, played by Robert Culp, after Hamilton receives a troublesome communication asking him to see Sebastian urgently. Hamilton is ushered into meeting Sebastian by his Kabbalistic housekeeper Lilith, played by Majel Barrett, who at the time was Roddenberry's wife. Sebastian explains that he wants Hamilton to go with him to London as he believes he has been targeted by witchcraft after his involvement with a woman called Anitra. Sebastian shows Hamilton a scar across his heart where he is adamant that this was caused by a spike to an effigy of him, which stopped his heart and thankfully, only due to Lilith's spells and conjurations, brought him back from the brink of death. Hamilton remains suspicious of the whole affair, but knows Sebastian well enough that unless the shit really has hit the fan, he would not have got in touch with him in the first place. Sebastian receives an unannounced visitor. Anitra Scion shows up, played by Anne Bell, known for her role, I'm sure that you remember, in BBC TV's Tenko, as well as The Shuttered Room, where she also appeared with Gig Young. Anitra begins to talk to Sebastian as if she wants him to murder her brother called Geoffrey. Sebastian ushers her into his study to continue the bizarre conversation. Anitra then promptly attempts to seduce Sebastian, which is completely out of character, but he spurns her amorous advances. Sebastian promptly and suddenly selects a book from his library, and after opening it at a specific page, hits Anitra slap bang between the tits. Anitra collapses screaming and writhing. Hamilton bursts in alarmed by the screeching, but Sebastian soon throws Hamilton from the room from what could be something harmful. Hamilton returns and demands an explanation. Sebastian informs him that what he witnessed wasn't the death of Anitra, but the death of a demon, a succubus, who had taken her form and was sent to seduce him through the power of lust. Succubuses, dear viewers, are those saucy little demons that literally fuck a man to death, draining all their intended victims' energies. Hamilton isn't too convinced and threatens Sebastian with reporting him to the authorities if he's spinning him a yarn, and threatens him with incarceration in the nut house, which he would have the contacts to do. Both head off to the UK to meet the real Anitra. The plane is piloted by Mitri Scion, brother of Geoffrey and Anitra, played by none other than John Hurt, and during the flight both Hamilton and Sebastian's lives are put into jeopardy once more by some malevolent force. Arriving in London, Sebastian suggests seeing Dr. Quallis for some assistance with matters of the occult. Arriving there, they see the house is on fire, and breaking in finds the doctor has been clawed to death by something otherworldly. Seemingly, Quallis had been trying to crawl to the centre of a pentagram for protection. Something advances towards them, and both men run for the sanctuary of the pentagram centre, and they glimpse a demon, a hybrid, half animal, half human, but definitely something that the bowels of hell had shat forth.
He's been torn to pieces.
Look at the design.
What is it?
It's a pentacle. He almost got to the center.
He's been clawed to death.
It's his journal. It's Quallis' journal. Here, hold this. Get in the center.
The arrival of the fire brigade scares the creature off, and before they leave, Sebastian takes Quallis' journal. Eventually, both arrive at the Scion mansion, escorted there by Inspector Cadell from Scotland Yard, played by none other than Mr. Hudson himself, Gordon Jackson. As you can see, there are some pretty big names in this pilot show, although arguably their talents are not necessarily used to their fullest potential. Cadell confirms that a few bizarre murders have occurred that may be linked to figures of importance within the British government, as well as dignitaries and important political persons from other countries, and that these mysterious deaths may also be attributed in some way to Geoffrey Scion. However, this cannot be proven. Arriving at the mansion, Hamilton and Sebastian are escorted to a room containing objets d'art and priceless treasures where they await to meet Anitra. Sebastian notices in a glass case an ivory coffin which he intuitively believes is where his effigy was placed. Sebastian smashes the case to retrieve it, but when he opens the small ivory coffin, he finds his effigy has gone. Over dinner, Geoffrey, played by the wonderful personification of toffdom, plum in one's mouth, James Villiers, known for his role in cracking films such as Polanski's Repulsion, Hammer's outstanding The Nanny, the horror anthology triumph that was Amicus's Asylum, and the Blood from the Mummy's Tomb, makes it known the terms of the contract. Sebastian has been tasked to discover if Geoffrey is genuinely under the spell of dark forces, or alternately to convince his sister Anitra he is simply debauched, a reckless, feckless libertine. That night, Sebastian explains to Hamilton that Quollis's journal mentions that an excavation of the Scion estate revealed a place called the Druid's Fire Pit. The pit is a stone circle which is in the ground somewhere, and it is hopeful daylight will highlight it and where they can both explore this more. The journal also reveals a strange sigil of the letter A. Sebastian tells Hamilton that A stands for Asmodeus, he who reigns supreme in the higher pantheon of evil demons, another name for the devil himself. That night, Hamilton wakes up to find a beautiful woman who in turn invites two other beauties to join them for a bit of old rumpy-pumpy four-way. Poor old Hamilton, his heart wouldn't have probably stood for this, to be honest with you. Sebastian disturbs this devilish seduction as he interrupts the ménage à quatre to alert Hamilton he has heard screams emanating from the Druid fire pit. The next day, eminent political figures and wealthy ne'er-do-wells from the fields of politics and business across the globe show up at the mansion. Sebastian believes Asmodeus is trying to spread his net of perversion and evil across the world using these influential people as ciphers. Inspector Cabal gets in touch again to follow up what has happened in the aftermath of Quollis's death. Sebastian and Hamilton meet him at the scene of Quollis's savage shredding, and Sebastian tells the police inspector about the legend of Asmodeus. Sebastian explains that Asmodeus last was seen in Britain in the 6th century AD, but was eventually trapped in the Druid fire pit, as even for his most ardent followers, his ceremonies were becoming too perverted and twisted for them to participate. Inspector Cadell dismisses this as a mere superstitious flummery. Back at the Scion mansion, both Sebastian and Hamilton prepare some protective measures to withhold evil as they plan to explore the circle. They follow the caverns which sprout out under the house, which led to an underground chamber, the heart of Black Mass. It seems, based on finding a broken seal, Asmodeus has escaped. Finding the other half just might repel and trap the demon by fighting this evil energy. Compelled to return, Sebastian makes a golden bullet from the half-seal he found, and all sorts of anti-evil paraphernalia he also collects to combat Asmodeus's force. Back at the mansion, the inspector turns up again to inform them that Anitra has disappeared. Both her brothers don't seem affected at all and begin to oversee an orgy. Hamilton and Sebastian return back to the caverns, leaving the Bacchanalian behind them. There they discover the body of Mitri, mummified, clutching the other half of the door seal, meaning the brother of Mitri in the house is none other than Asmodeus himself, as Asmodeus can only possess the form of someone who is dead. Very soon the chamber is filled with the Black Mass celebrants, including dwarfs, and a sacrifice, none other than Anitra. Anitra is to be sacrificed, and her brother Geoffrey is to prove his dedication to Asmodeus by sacrificing her or by giving her one on the altar. Geoffrey can't do either, sacrifice or rudies, especially with his sister. Yuck. Enraged, Metri begins to transform fully into Asmodeus. Sebastian fools Asmodeus by pretending to go along with the ceremony. Inspector Cabal is also present and is revealed to be another disciple for this despicable Lord of Darkness. Sebastian, playing along, agrees to be the priest of the ceremony, and in turn, Asmodeus, tricked, removes the spike from Sebastian's effigy, believing he cannot fully perform the ceremony and his priestly duties with this restriction. At the 11th hour, Sebastian chucks holy water at the creature. He partly repels the entity back with half the door seal used originally to imprison Asmodeus, and with his other hand shoots Asmodeus with the golden bullet created from the other part of the seal. Sebastian and Hamilton rescue Anitra and flee the antechamber as it begins to erupt in flames, engulfing the disciples and eventually spreading with great gusto up to the Scion house. All evil is apparently perished. There are some truly excellent British set pieces, as the project was filmed entirely in England, utilising Elm Street Studios courtesy of EMI, and therefore Hertfordshire, bucolic woodlands, are used to great effect. The actual mansion itself, a beautiful property, was the All Saints Pastoral Centre that was used extensively for filming. The special effects are also to note because they were courtesy of designer Stuart Freeborn, who would create Yoda. Also of note is the use of the knotty, bumpy foreheads that happen in this film, which are akin to those used for the Klingons in the Star Trek motion pictures that were made 2 years later. Overall, the special effects are okay, but they are a bit terribly crude, especially the Asmodeus frog-like form, which is laughable as well as endearing for productions of this time. The American network, NBC, screened Spectre, and the response was favourable, although the version screened was in fact censored. One appeal they found was the Holmes and Watson teaming up of Sebastian and Hamilton, with Lilith, I suppose, really replicating Holmes's housekeeper, except this housekeeper was a whiz at incantations, spellcraft, and demonological knowledge. NBC did have an idea of commissioning a series from this, but that alas never surfaced due to Roddenberry being whisked away for working again on Star Trek reappraisal for a contemporary audience. Now almost a decade had passed, and I guess there was nobody to hand the mantle to. It's a shame, as I can imagine this would have worked out quite well. The acting itself is very credible indeed, borderline campy sometimes, especially regarding John Hurt, and the use of actors in this series would have appealed for the potential success of the show had it been commissioned in the UK as well as the USA. Highlights indeed are seeing straight-laced Gordon Jackson, known for his slightly stoic roles, revelling in his transformative demon guise as part of the bacchanalian orgy sequences at the end of this production. Another surprise is the choice of director being none other than Clive Donner, synonymous with quirky British quintessences. Here we go round the mulberry bush, What's New Pussycat, and 1963's all-star casted film The Caretaker. To be honest, with regards to Spectre, I quite enjoyed this slice of hokum and was a little lamented that there was nothing that became of it, in all honesty. It's a little bumpy and seems to struggle with where it wants to go. Does it want to appeal to an adult audience? Maybe. Or to a teenage marketable one? Perhaps. It also tries to be serious, but there is also throughout some whimsy which can be felt, and it does sometimes generate a bit of a clash as it doesn't seem to know quite what it wants to be. It could have worked, I think, very well if the more humoresque elements were toned down. The plot has a few loopholes and would warrant thorough explanation, but this may have developed if the series had been allowed to continue, perhaps. The pilot is jam-packed of mystical, referring to Asmodeus, Lilith, mystical seals, runes, caverns, incantations, black masses, stone circles, signs and sigils, and a whole host of other supernatural bell, book and candle superstitious reference as old as time itself. But sometimes, because so much has been put into it, this becomes rather messy, as you can sense that all of this is being shoehorned into the plot. We also have the supernatural versus science staple, which are par of the course for programs or films of the genre, and they're thrown in for good measure, but Nigel Neal, it ain't. I feel the word hokum springs to mind, but hokum done very well indeed, and it's evidence from the actors involved that they seem to have a whole lot of fun with it, and they just seem to go with the flow. John Hurt here, as always, gives a tip-top performance, as to be honest, all of the leads do, with only the supporting cast and bits of Totty in it being as wooden as a forest where Spectre is set. I'll also check out Vicky Michelle as a frivolous housemaid before she became more well known for the role of Yvette in the 1980s comedy series Hello Hello. Oh, Renee! I like Vicky Michelle, beautiful looking, and has appeared in quite a few other cult TV and film productions, such as the sleazy little piece of British horror known as Virgin Witch. That springs to mind, for example. Might review that one day on here. The film is quite difficult to find, with the exception of the odd bootleg, which is probably mastered from screenings over the years on television. Fox Movies did screen it, and it was fortunately uncensored, and it's this uncut print which has enabled me to bring you this review. Spectre, in its uncut form, sports nudity excised from the TV showings, as well as more overtly sexual innuendo, highlighting things such as sadomasochism, as well as the incest references. Spectre was released overseas theatrically as a standalone movie, with all these contentious pieces of rudery featured in the duration of it, and a bit like the plot, this neither fits into a TV movie format, guys, or a theatrical film presentation. It seems to sit somewhere in between, but enjoyable it is. Go find. Right, that brings this episode to a close, my beloved ones, and so until next time on Look, Look and Look Again, keep your pentacles polished and your runes well rubbed. Cheerio!
Kill us all.
Defy him!
No one is above the law. A bargain struck is a bargain made. A bargain made. That's the law. That's the law.
I reject thee, vile spirit, depart!
I give thee hell.
Now, the other seal.
I command thee, flee!
Spectre.